If you're a man, listen up. That's right, listen up. Today's episode is dedicated to you. Yes, you, men. It's a show about men, for men, by a woman. And women out there listening, if you're curious, you should be. Because if you love men or raising little boys, this will help you understand them better, which will help you love them even more.
I'm no good at goodbye. Down on my knees, tears in my eyes. I'm no good at goodbye. I can't conceive, leave the old side. I'm no good at goodbye.
Hey all, welcome back to the show. This is episode number 6, yes, number 6 of Unscripted, a podcast that inspires people to go off script and live healthier, more vital, more meaningful lives, as we like to say over here at Point Zero Productions. I'm your host, Nell Daly. I'm a practicing psychotherapist, television commentator, writer, and mother. Before I begin today, I just want to give a huge shout out to all the people who got in touch with me after last Monday's show, which was called My Secret and Obsession with the Light. On that show, for those of you who haven't listened to it yet, I came out of what I like to call the spiritual closet, so to speak. I wrote and recorded, essentially, an essay on my experience with becoming more and more intuitive over the years, which manifests in me, quote-unquote, seeing light or auras in certain situations. Among experiencing unexplainable, what's called in the spiritual world or the intuitive world, synchronicities on a daily basis, all of which have ignited my interest, my deep interest in how psychospiritual practices like the study of human consciousness and universal consciousness helps us to heal ourselves from all kinds of things like anxiety and depression and panic and addiction and perhaps even cancer without the use of overprescribed medications or self-medicating. So this was pretty brave on my part professionally, and I was a little nervous to say what I said, but man, you guys made it super easy. And once it was out there and the emails started flooding in from all over the country, and in fact, from a few different countries, I got an email from someone in Ireland and someone in Australia as well. I never looked back, really. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of that support. It was really cool. For today's episode, though, as much as I love talking about all the super spiritual stuff, I wanted to step away from it because honestly, I was feeling like we all needed a good dose of some good old-fashioned relationship talk. I wanted to bring us back down a bit, what's usually called ground us, and have some, and you'll have to excuse my language here, fucking fun. I wanted to have a little bit of fun. So yeah, this show will show you a different side of me. It will be more explicit, so if there are little ears around, that's probably not such a good thing. You'll probably want to listen to this one when you're alone or with adults in the room. Although, I have to be honest, Larry keeps it pretty clean. It's probably me that starts to get a little more explicit than Larry does. So I wanted to talk today, and this interview that I do with Larry speaks to this, about all the stuff that we deal with on a practical level in our everyday lives, which is stuff like marriage and work and pressure to perform, parenting, sex, self-actualization. Now, you've heard from my intro that this episode is about men and for men. But women, again, I don't want you to tune this out. You should actually tune in with your most open-hearted self. Today's episode is with a guy named Larry Hagner, and I couldn't be more psyched. Really, I couldn't be more psyched about having him on the show. Larry is the founder and host of another podcast called The Good Dad Project. I was actually introduced to Larry last December through a mutual friend in the media world, and Quickly, Larry asked if I would be on his show. I was actually only the second woman in 2 years asked to be on his show. And so, of course, I was like, hell yeah, I'll be on your show. So we did the show a couple months ago now, and we talked all about intimacy and relationships. Another topic I'm obsessed with is intimacy. For those of you who have watched my TED Talk, know. So basically, I let Larry pick my brain for about an hour. And of course, the conversation turned quite a bit towards sex, as it sometimes does with men. And we just had the most amazing time on this podcast. And what happened afterwards is that about 30,000 people, I think that's the last number he gave me, it could be more than that now, have listened to this podcast. And I got letters and emails and phone calls from people all over the world about this one show. And we sat back, Larry and I, and we asked ourselves, why did it resonate so much with people? What did we learn from doing this show? And what we learned, especially about men, is that men are hungry for more intimacy in their marriages or with their partners. That men suffer in silence with depression and anxiety because our society is constantly telling men it's weak to be vulnerable, which further shuts them down. Larry and I did a bunch of follow-up sort of mini masterminds with his guys after the show, and it was a really moving thing for me to see, to have men on these group calls open up to me and ask me questions about a whole spectrum of things that you could tell many of them had never felt safe asking before, or actually didn't even know where to turn to look for help or answers. This kind of process, this kind of opening up therapeutically never ceases to amaze me. I work with lots of men in my New York City practice. In fact, I quasi-specialize in working with men now. Everyone from pro athletes to musicians to A-list actors and many high-profile, high-stress C-suite types. I love the work because once you help unlock or shift something in a man that's kept him stuck, it's powerful. And to be honest, again, really moving. There's this like trickle down effect that happens. His relationships get better across the board, for one, both in his professional and his personal life. His physical health improves. And sort of like the most beautiful thing to witness is that this internal pressure he has felt building for years inside of him starts to ease. With my show, Unscripted, I intend to do a lot of podcasts on men and for men, sort of like a meditation on men and what's going on with them in 2017 in America. I'm super curious about not just helping them, but getting to know them better from the other side. To see how I and we and women can do this unconditional love for each other thing with men just a little bit better. So in an effort to keep paying it forward and being of service, I asked Larry, who is just a wonderful guy, to please, please, please be on my show. And not to mention, Larry has an incredible story. He is an author and a speaker. He's a coach and a podcaster, and he's the founder of the Good Dad Project, which is dedicated to helping men become the best versions of themselves so they can show up big for their kids.
I'm no good at goodbye. Down on my knees, tears in my eyes. I'm no good at goodbye. I can't conceive, leave the old side. I'm no good at goodbye.
Today's episode is partially supported by Quero Shoes. This is such a great company. I have to tell you, I am so proud to be aligned with them. Let me tell you a little bit about Quero Shoes. They're handmade shoes for men and women, crafted by Spanish artisans who use only the finest materials from Italy and France and Spain. Quero has made it simple for you to buy a classic upscale shoe that is literally custom designed by you. So how do you do this? You simply go to Quero.com. That's QUEROHMS.com. And you pick out a style you love. And man, do they have some gorgeous styles to choose from. I was on their website and it's really off the hook stuff, you guys. And then you build your shoes to fit your own taste and measurements. You can pick the laces you want, the heel size, even the exact color of the leather. This is an old way to make shoes, but a new way to buy them. And if that's not enough, they even offer free shipping in the US and free returns. That's awesome. And when you sign up for their newsletter, you also get an extra 15% off with your purchase. So go to Quero.com to learn more. That's QUEROHMS.com to learn more.
I'm no good at goodbye. Down on my knees, tears in my eyes. I'm no good at goodbye. Now can't you see? Leave the old side. I'm no good at goodbye.
So it's wonderful to have you on the show today, Larry. Thank you so much for joining me.
What is going on? How are you doing?
I'm good. So I just wanted to start quickly for everyone out there. Can you tell me your story and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to do this within 2 minutes. I think I can at this point. So
I don't know the whole story. So this is awesome for me. I don't know how you got to this show, like how you got to the place where you wanted to do a podcast called the Good Dad Project. So this is awesome.
Yeah. So I've told this story, I guess, many times, but on other podcasts. But no, you and I never talked about it in all of our conversations. But yeah, so my mom and biological father were married in 1971. I was born in 1975. By the time I was 9 months old, they got divorced, and I was raised exclusively by my mom from the age of pretty much 0 to 4 years old. Never saw my biological father, never knew him, don't remember him, anything like that. When I was 4, my mom married another man by the name of Joe Hagner, which he adopted me. And that's why I have the last name I do, because of my stepdad. They were married from the time I was 4 to the time I was 10. And what I can tell you about that is he just one of the nicest guys I think I've ever met. Although, he taught me a lot about respect. He was ex-military, taught me a lot about manners, but he had a drinking problem. And he was a white collar worker, had a great job and everything. But he had a drinking problem. So when he drank, he became literally the polar opposite of what he was when he was sober, he was a great guy sober. But, it became 6 years of just kind of chaos. In fact, the longer they were married, the worse it got towards the tail end. But, they were, physical abuse, mental abuse, all those crazy things, fights with him and my mom. I mean, it was really crazy there for a while. They got divorced when I was 10.
Did you have any siblings as well?
No, not biologically.
Not biologically, okay.
My mom couldn't have any more kids after me for some reason. I don't know why, but no more kids after me. But they got divorced when I was 10, and he was gone. I have not seen him since. In fact, I just learned not too long ago that he actually died in 2010. I didn't know that. But so I went through 2 years, no father figure. My mom dated on and off. And when I was 12, something really interesting happened. I actually met my biological father as a total fluke when I was 12 for the very first time. We had this short, brief relationship that was about 3 months, 4 months long.
And did you meet him independent of your mother? Did you bump into him independent of her?
Yeah, it's that. That's why, I try to tell the story quick, but what happened was I ran into him.
See, I don't believe anything happens randomly. I think that there's divine timing and everything. So I've done this work for over a decade now. So I've heard 20,000 hours of people's life stories. And there are synchronicities that happen in our lives that are completely unexplainable. There's no way that I don't think that something else is out there kind of putting the pieces together so we have an experience.
Well, you'll probably be fascinated how this ends then.
Oh, wait. So yeah, can you tell? Can we diverge for just a quick second?
Yeah, so it's I guess it's pretty serendipitous. I guess I don't know. That's about the best way I could think of it. But so we had a relationship for a few months. He was remarried at the time. I had a 2-year-old half brother. His wife was pregnant with my younger half brother. And then about 3 or 4 months pass by, and you ever get that feeling in a relationship where the person's kind of like starting to do this like fade away, like you
Yeah.
don't really know what's going on, but you know they're really not into it anymore. Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of what happened with us. And I remember asking him like, hey, what's going on? Like I feel like we're not as close. Like something's wrong. Even at 12 years old, I remember like being around him, and there was something just very heavy about
Mm.
the relationship. So he basically had a conversation with me, and it went something like, hey, this is really complicated for me. Like, got a lot of things going on, and I just don't think this is going to work out for us. And so we parted ways. And
Did he live in around the same community where you lived? Is that,
yeah, he only lived 2 miles away. So, and I didn't know that for 12 years. He lived 2 miles away from us.
did your mom reconnect the two of you together?
No, no. Here's how it happened. So I knew his name. And I knew his last name, which was different than mine. His name's Larry too. And I heard someone say, I was at a rec center when I was 12 with a friend of mine playing basketball. And I heard one of the workers say, here comes Mrs. So-and-so to make a payment. Well, his last name is not all that common. So I just, for some reason, I asked the guy, hey, is she married? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what's her husband's name? He said, Larry. I was like, huh. So I went up to her. Here I am, 12 years old. I went up to her and I was like, hey, what's your name? And she told me. And I was like, are you married to a guy named Larry? And she looked at me real puzzled. She's like, yes. And I said, well, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I think he's my father. And then she looked at me. Yeah, you have that look, and someone knows exactly what's going on. And she asked me, she goes, are you Larry? I said, yeah. And she's like, yeah, I'm married to your father. And so she's just asked me, she's like, would you like to talk to him? So we went around the corner to a payphone. This is 1987.
Wow.
And she called home, and she's like, hey, I'm standing here with your son. Would you like to speak to him?
And what was going through your mind at that time? In that
I was
moment?
terrified. I was totally terrified. I didn't know what to think. I just knew I always had this curiosity about me when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
I've never grown out of it. I'm always curious. And so I at that point, like, my mom and stepdad had been divorced for 2 years. I really wanted to know who this guy was. So we started talking. I could tell it was kind of a humbling conversation for him just by the sound of his voice. And then we decided, like, hey, I'd really like to meet you in person. And then I went home and I told my mom what had happened. And then I guess maybe the two of them set it up to where, like, yeah, maybe you should probably meet. So we met, and then we kind of had this relationship for a few months.
And then he said, this is complicated for me, and I'm going to have to stop the relationship on some level.
Yeah.
So, and what happened to you at that point? Like, how did you respond? How did you internalize that? By the way, I just fell in love with you. Tell your Wolf I'm sorry. Like, oh my God. And you know what it is? Like, now I will do anything for the Good Dad Project. Like that. See, this is why you do these interviews, because it's the human story behind it.
Yeah.
That's what not only draws people in, but makes us understand how you can take something so painful and turn it into something so incredibly positive. And that the suffering that we go through causes us to find a place of enlightenment. That without that suffering, like I always say to people, I wouldn't trade the suffering I've gone through ever. Because your father actually ended up, your biological father, and on some level already I can tell that your stepfather were some of your greatest spiritual teachers. Because it's the people who hurt us the most in life that deepen our process and make us find grace before we ever would. And when it happens, when we face adversity as a child, you're the person I'd want to sit down next to at a dinner table and have a conversation, because it makes us interesting and it makes us dynamic and moving as human beings. And that's really what we're here to experience. So
I agree. And I think for a long time, I kind of grew up with this, maybe more of a victim mentality.
of course, yeah.
And I guess by the time I was 30, I was just sort of done with that, and I was tired of it. And that's why I made the shift that I did. But yeah, going back to when I was 12, to answer your question, I didn't realize how to process it then, and I don't even think I really understood it until I started really doing what I'm doing now. And it really sort of put me in this mode of like insecurity, disparity. I kind of just gave up on everything at 12. I failed 8th grade, literally got Fs in every single subject. I just was like, I'm just kind of done with school, and I just kind of gave up. Started overeating a lot. I used to be really overweight as a kid, and was just like, I wasn't good at sports, so I didn't have sports to go into. I just sort of ate. I kind of went into food, and then my mom, for the next several years, dated this series of men, and that were just disastrous. Like always some sort of element of addiction, abuse. So basically, looking back on my childhood, really what it was. And then she married, or she was with another guy when I was 15. He was the worst, like absolute nightmare experience.
And she remarried him?
No, they were together. They would live together for a couple of years. But she's been married a total of 3 times. But basically half my childhood was spent without a father figure, and then the other half was spent with these really toxic, chaotic father figures. And then, so fast forward, this is more towards the end of the story. When I was 30, so 11 years ago, 2 things happened in my life. So after 12 years old, I didn't see my biological father anymore. So when I was 30, I had my first son. I have 4 now. And I ran into my biological father again. As a
I have
total
chills. I have chills. Okay.
It was a total fluke. I was
Still
sitting
in the same town? You're still living in the same town at this point?
We live in St. Louis, so it's fairly big city, not huge like New York, but it's definitely harder to run into somebody. But I was sitting at a coffee shop working, and I was with a coworker of mine who was also a really good friend of mine. And
what is your career at that point? Can you say?
It was pharmaceutical sales.
Pharmaceutical sales. Okay.
Yeah. And so we were sitting there talking, having a meeting and over coffee, and all of a sudden, you know how like somebody walks in, they kind of catch your eye, and I looked up and I was like, holy crap, there's my father. Like it had been almost 20 years, but I still recognized him. He looked just the same, just a little older, a little rounder, but I knew it was him. And
did that feeling of ice go through your veins? Where it feels like someone's poured a bucket of ice in? Yeah, I've felt that before when I thought I've run into my dad, actually. But go ahead.
Yeah, it was like, the fight or flight.
Yeah.
So the coworker I was with, the girl that I was with, looked at me, and she was a really good friend of mine at the time too. And she knew this story, and she looked at me, she goes, what's wrong with you? You look like you've just seen a ghost. And I said, I was like, you're not going to believe this. I was like, but my father just walked in. She's like, your father, like the one you told me about? And I was like, yeah. She's like, where is he? And I was like, well, he's right over there. And she's like, oh my God. She goes, what are you going to do? I was like, nothing. She's like, what do you mean nothing? She goes, you're going to sit here and let him walk out? I was like, yeah. I was like, I don't, I have no interest in talking to him. I was like, not that I hold any ill will, but like, it would just be awkward at this point. I'm a grown man. I'm 30 years old. Like, well, what am I going to say? And she's like, you're going to let him walk out of here without saying a thing? And I was like, there's nothing to say. So she just gets up and goes over to his table, like didn't even say a word. She didn't even say, I'm going to go talk to him. She just got up and went over to him. I was like, holy crap, what is she doing? So they're all the way across the Starbucks, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, what do I do? Do I leave? Do I get up and go to the bathroom? What do I do? And I saw them talking, and then I saw him like look around, and I could read his lips, and he said, where is he? And then we made eye contact, and I was like, holy crap, this is really going to happen. He gets up, comes over and he shakes my hand. And my dad, I kind of make him sound like this bum. He's actually an uber successful entrepreneur, owned his own business, very successful guy for the past 35 years. He's wearing nice clothes. He comes over and he's like,
so the apple doesn't fall far from the tree on some level either. Right? I had to say that.
You're funny.
No, well, it's true, because people sometimes don't make those connections, right? They don't. Had you ever made that connection because we repeat patterns and we don't even understand why we repeat them. But obviously you've become an incredibly successful entrepreneur. And so without even knowing it, in some ways, not only honoring him, but maybe there's just that intrinsic or hardwiredness to create something, right? So So go ahead. So
he came over, and I wasn't very nice, but I wasn't mean. I was just sort of indifferent. And he asked me how I was, and are you married? Do you have kids? And I said, yeah, I'm married. I have a son. And he's like, well, we should get breakfast sometime. And I'm like, you know what? I was like, you don't have to be nice. I was like, not that let's do lunch type thing. He's like, no, you should call me sometime. He gave me his card, and I was like, here's my card. If you want to call me, that's fine. If not, no big deal. I'm good either way. And I think within an hour, I had like this crazy long email from him, just saying like he, wanted to get together and all this other stuff. So anyway, here we are 11 years later.
Yeah.
I have a relationship with him. I don't call him dad, but I just call him Larry. My kids know him as Papa, and is still married to the same woman. I have 2 younger half brothers. But we get along. We don't have a typical dad-son relationship, but we do have a relationship. It's more of a friendship. His wife is great. My kids love them both dearly. And we've had one conversation about the past. That's really about it. And it was really, after we kind of got together and things looked like they were going to, be around for a while, I sat him down and I was like, basically I asked him a question. Can you please tell me what the hell happened?
Yeah.
And let me know what, and he did. He was very humble and apologetic. And he was like, I didn't know what else to do at the time. I was 35 years old and I thought it was the right thing to do, is the wrong thing to do. And so we made a decision from then on out that we're just going to focus on the years that we have left and not waste any time on baggage from the past. And so where'd the Good Dad Project come from? So when I became a father myself, I learned basically what not to do, not what to do. So I spent half of my.
Can you say that again? Can you say that one more time? You learned.
I learned everything what not to do, but I had no idea what to do.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
So
that's how many of us feel as parents.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so I've been a dad for 11 years. I spent 5 of those years really struggling with it, patience, irritability, still have my days with it too. But, and then there was even a point where I didn't think my marriage was going to survive just because I was just frustrated. Not only was I frustrated, but I was frustrated that I was frustrated, which made it even worse.
How did you cope with that frustration at that time?
Held it in. Yeah. Just held it in. And then, I really hit a low point with it one night, and I decided at one point I was like, "This is it. I need to get my life in order." And I just I guess I didn't know this then, but I know it now. I just surrendered my ego, and I just said, "I'm going to become a student of this." Like literally, that was the thing. I'm going to be a student of this, and just be the best person I can, and hopefully that'll be the byproduct will be a better father. So I just became a sponge for self-improvement, self-development. And then what I found was being a better man basically helped me become a better father and a better husband. So I started a blog and then a podcast and then wrote a book. And what I found was men really relate to someone they can feel, someone they feel in the trenches with.
Yeah.
We don't relate to a guy preaching from a pulpit. We relate to the guy who's just as imperfect as the guy next to us. And that's really what the podcast is. That's what my book is. It's written by a dad for a dad.
It's like a brotherhood. It's more than you don't need necessarily another leader in your life. What you need is a brotherhood.
Yeah. A brotherhood.
A soldier next to you on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, somewhat of a leader, but more of like, hey, I
get it.
I get it. I get it. And here's some things I've learned, and that's really what my podcast is. I joke about it because the podcast is a public platform of me learning. and then you just get to share it. So
I know. People always think that there's like this big magic thing as to why you're doing this. And I said, honestly, part of me, as much as obviously there's just this incredible delight in living a meaningful life. And I believe in living a meaningful life, that we're healthier and we thrive better as people if we have a life of deep meaning. But I'm just a curious junkie, right? I just want to have engaging conversations with super interesting people about topics that I love. So, and then if you can share those conversations with other people and it can help, that's awesome. So it sounds like that was part of your journey.
Yeah, and it still is because, every day is, as you know, I mean, if you're a parent, every day is new. I mean, I'm a father of 4 boys now, and every day I'm a father of 4 boys is a new day that I'm a father of 4 boys.
Right.
Yeah.
What's so interesting for me as a woman, I'm a single mother. 40, as we've spoken before, so 50% about 50% of us now are divorced in this country. So there's a lot of boys being raised by single mothers. And I cannot for the life of me right now remember the movie where the woman won the Oscar, that's shot with Ethan Hawke. Do you know which movie I'm talking about? And it's shot over a certain period of time.
I don't remember. No, I don't
Oh, it's
remember.
an incredible film, and it's about a young boy who he it's literally almost as if it's your life, the life that you described, and I'll have to get it to you after. I'll mention it after the show when we wrap up. But it takes place in a series of different years in this boy's life, and the mother, it takes her through two other marriages besides her leaving the biological father. It takes her through a couple of other marriages, and both of the two marriages that she gets involved in after her primary marriage are with people who have either mental health or alcohol addiction issues. And I can say, as a single woman for the last 3 years, it's really difficult to find men, and women talk about this all the time, who don't either have some sort of untreated mental health issue going on, because I think men are so, not because I think that they are mentally more unhealthy than women. I think they don't seek out the help and treatment that they need because they privately suffer in a way that women don't privately suffer. And I think the second thing is addiction. And I think that men suffer with addiction, not only, I don't think necessarily that they have a larger propensity for addiction than other people. I think it's more that, again, because they're not treating the underlying stress, they turn to alcohol and drugs to manage mostly the financial stress that they feel that they have to provide for their families. And that just creates this vicious cycle.
That makes total sense. I mean, even as you say that, like I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense. It really does.
Well, it must resonate for you, like your childhood self and watching what your mother experienced in terms of the men that she invited into her life, because she didn't obviously want to be lonely, or she wanted companionship, or she wanted that sort of partnership, perhaps even a role model for you. And then in your adult life, as you struggled to be a parent and how you tried to cope with it, or not cope with it, like many of us do. So it's fascinating that, and what makes your show even more poignant to me now is that so many boys are now going to be raised by single mothers. And how does that change who they are? And again, you bring it full circle, because it not only changes who they are in that moment, that they're being raised by those single moms, but then how do they know how to be a dad if they don't necessarily have that healthy male role model in their life who is a father? So they're really starting from square one, from scratch, when they become fathers themselves. And I'm raising two little boys, so I think about this all the time. Is it better to have somebody around or not have somebody around? I struggle with all of these issues. How will they know? And they have a very active biological father in their lives, so it's slightly different, but I still feel that they're not seeing that nuclear partnership that they should be, quote unquote, should be seeing.
Yeah.
That's just not their reality, and not the reality of millions of American families out there now that are constructed in different ways.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. Like if I were to be single, even my wife and I have talked about this. Like if we were single, I think I would. I think for the most part, some people like to keep their dating life and their kids, as two separate worlds. And I almost think if I were single, I would go to the extreme of that. And I would
Because of
probably
your childhood experience.
I would, yeah, until I felt pretty darn certain that this relationship was not only going to be one that was going to be longer term, but one that was going to be a good one, and a good one for them to see. Because I think I would make the decision, and maybe because of my past, like if this is not going to work out like long term, or maybe this is just sort of like we're just having fun, or whatever it is. But I probably would keep those two worlds separate. But if it was something that looked like it was going to be a deep, meaningful relationship, and one that was going to be around for a while, and one that, was going to be more, it would be a good example, then I probably would combine those two worlds. But until I felt pretty good about that, I think I'd probably just not really do that.
Can you tell me? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Have you ever, I think can I tell you why?
Yeah. Can you tell me
So have you ever seen the movie The Holiday?
No.
Jude Law and
No.
Kate Beckinsale. Okay. Well, I won't even use that as an example then, but I would just be, I would be really cautious about the women that I would bring into their lives. Because, and not just the women, but I would be really cautious of the relationship between me and that woman that I bring to their life. Just because I've seen how many disastrous relationships, and I always remember this even as a kid, like my mom and this whoever guy she was with were so happy in the beginning. And even as a kid, like a little kid, between 8 and 15 years old or whatever I was, I'd always be like, when is this going to get bad? Because I know it will. That was always like, there was like a looming thing. I even felt like I knew that things were going to happen before the guy she was with was going to see it happen.
Right.
It's like, some guys would come in and be like, dude, you just don't know. You just don't know what's about to happen over the next, 3 months, 6 months, or whatever it is.
Because you could see your mom wanting to exit the relationship.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, I could always, looking back on it, I could always tell when my mom was done with the relationship, but she'd hold on to it. Like even my stepdad that she was married to for 6 years, the last 2 or 3 years was hell. And I know it was because, for several reasons, but I could tell looking back on it now, I didn't see it. I didn't know what it was then, but my mom was checked out. Like she was done, like no longer in it, emotionally just gone from it. And, that was a weird thing to see as a kid,
Well, it also affects the way, I'm listening to every single word you're saying, and I think that so many men and women will be listening to this as well. But you can see children, and I see this in my private practice, and I've seen it in my personal life and both my personal and professional life. You can see children sort of start to check out on new guys that they're meeting because they're just like, whatever, I'm ambivalent about you because you're probably not going to be around forever. So they carry that with them and also, now in modern life, and it was probably different back then, although it sounds like your mom had to work the whole time that she was a mother as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she worked. There's so little time to spend with your kids that if you're sharing it with someone that you're not totally sure about and you're taking that time away from them, kids really feel that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they totally do.
Right. So all of this story, all of these layers came to a head for you as you became a father on some level, but then again, you turned it into this incredible podcast. One of the things I wanted to ask you about were, what are some of the main issues that men bring to you that they're talking about? Now you've formed a Dad's Edge Alliance where you do master classes. This has really blossomed into something much bigger. It's really a revolution, sort of this movement that you've created out there. Can you tell me what they're bringing to you, what they want to know most about, what they struggle with the most?
Yeah, for sure. I think what I hear the most is confidence is one. Patience is the one I hear all the time. I can almost say it before they do.
Is this in terms of fatherhood or everything?
Yeah,
just mostly
everything.
fatherhood, everything.
Fatherhood and everything.
Right,
So
right.
patience, work-life balance, work-life integration, whatever you want to call it. They not having boundaries. Frustration. Frustration meaning they're frustrated with I think a lot of men will get to their mid-30s. They're married, they have a couple kids, they look at their life and they're like, holy crap, like, did I really, now I'm just in the grind, now I do all this because I have to. Like, do I really even want to do it? Is this really what my life is going to be about? I don't know if you call that a midlife crisis or what, but I think a lot of men get to that point and they're like, okay, like I have a lot going against me right now. And I just want to put on a suit of armor to be better about it, to handle it better, to manage it better. And I think that's really what we bring. The other thing too is relationships with their wives. So many guys, like, their marriage is surviving. It's not thriving. Right. So they want, like, they're like, man, I want to be able to become friends with my wife again. I want romance back. I want passion back. I want to be able to talk to her like we used to, joke around like we used to, do things like we used to. And then when it comes to kids, like you ask any guy, fatherhood by far is the most important thing that they want, that they want to be. But what I've used this analogy a lot. When I became a father for the first time, I think this is what resonates with men the most, is that the frustration that you don't know what to do. Because I
Like
got
in
my
actually the
degree.
day-to-day parenting,
Yeah.
like the day-to-day
Yeah.
interaction, interpersonal interactions with the children.
Right. Like we may know how to do it, but we don't necessarily feel good about doing it, or we don't feel good about how we do it, if that makes sense. So like perfect example, and I've used this a lot when I've coached men or in our mastermind classes or even during my speaking events, like I'll use this analogy a lot and I'll see a lot of people go, oh yeah, that's what I feel. So I got my degree in health management, exercise science, nutrition. So I can tell you anything you want to know about the body, exercise, what to eat, anything wellness related, health related. I can tell you what to do, just like your background is in psychology. That's your expertise. But what fatherhood felt like to me was going to work every day as an architect, and every day was the first day I was there.
Right.
So
And you never studied architecture before?
never studied architecture. I'm not good at math. I'm not good at angles. And it was just when I think if you ask any guy, what's been the most frustrating point of your career? I think a lot of guys will say it was the first 90 days of my job. Like, cause I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like a moron. Well, if you look at fatherhood, that's what a lot of these guys feel like. They feel like they're that architect and every day is new. So they're always wondering like, okay, am I doing this right? Why am I getting so aggravated? Why am I losing my patience? So it becomes like this part of their lives where they can't measure anything. Like for instance, in the workplace,
Men love to measure.
they do.
They love
And
it. They love it. Yeah.
in more ways than one.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So do women, maybe. But go ahead.
Right. But I think men like quarterly earnings, right? Like men with businesses, did my business grow or did it not? Oh my gosh, look at the numbers. It did. Awesome. Pat on the back. Fatherhood, am I doing a good job? I don't know. What's the measure? How do I measure that? My kids are happy, but my kids are pissed off a lot too, or they act out, or the grades aren't the best, or they're not the best athlete, or they're this or they're that, or they drive their mother nuts. So am I doing a good job? I don't know. So, and you can even hear, like, as I talk about it, I was like, you feel that tension, and that's what I hear from a lot of guys. So all those things that I just explained, those are the things we hear the most.
Well, it's really interesting. I just want to go back to, men. I think one of the things, if there's one of the things that I want to come out of the podcast is women understanding men better. And I am sort of a hybrid creature. I've told you this personally because I've worked so closely with so many men in my private practice, and I've sat with their pain and their joy and what they've struggled with. I really feel like I understand men, and I really feel like many, many women don't understand the men that they're with or the men that they're trying to be with. And one of the things that you have to understand as a woman and as a mother and as a wife is that men love to fix things. They just want concrete answers, right? Men always talk in outline form. So if I have couples in my office and the guy says, well, 1, she does this, 2, she does this, or he'll say, these are the issues, A, B, C. Women never speak this way. Right? This comes right back down to language. Women just start talking about the problem, and it could go here, it could go there. It's a little bit more circular. There's not necessarily a solution to it. It's actually just about, most of the time, feelings, where men are about concrete points. And again, they want to be measured, and they want to leave the couple session with an action plan, right? Definitely. They need to know. They want information.
They do.
They want information to fix. And so again, how does this translate into the way that we parent? Well, for women, and not all women, but for a lot of women, it just feels like second nature. If it's messy, it's okay. We just sort of surf it. And I always tell the women who are suffering with postpartum depression in my office and new parents in general, make peace with the idea that you are going to fail 1,000,000 times the minute that baby comes out into this world. You're going to fail every day. Like, we're going to fail. They don't give you a handbook. They should. There should be definitely a bigger handbook when you leave the hospital, because anybody can have a baby, right? And so they give these human beings to people who have no clue what they're doing, and they send you in a car with a car seat. They care more whether or not the car seat's plugged in correctly than if you have any clue what you're doing as a parent.
Have you ever seen the movie Parenthood back in the day?
Yes.
That was like Keanu Reeves, I think, like one of his original movies. Like, you remember he was like the teenage boyfriend who was like the complete loser guy? He's got this classic line in the movie because he was raised with a crazy horrible father.
Yeah.
And there's this part where his mother-in-law and him are having this conversation. She's asking him about his past, and like he was like, yeah, like my dad used to yell at me, he used to do this, he used to beat me up. And she's like, how did you survive that? Like how did you become like the guy that you are? He's like, just in the Keanu Reeves style, he's like, let me tell you, like they'll give like they'll make somebody have a license to go catch a fish. I mean, you need a license to go drive a car, but they'll let any asshole be a father. Like that's what he said, and it's so true. Like they'll let anybody be a
They'll
parent.
let any asshole. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
They let me do it 3 times. That's true. They let you do it again. They don't even like check and see like, how are you doing with this? And then you just have more of them.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that is like, so again, for you, the mission then became, or the journey became, how do I get this information? I also think that just to respond back to what you're saying that men talk to you a lot about is all of a sudden you hit this point. For me, it was around 36, 37 after I had my last child and I knew I wasn't going to have any more. I had this moment lying down one night and I had a crib next to me because one of my children was not feeling well and the other one was sleeping on the floor and the other one was down the hallway with my husband at the time. And I remember staring at the ceiling thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And oh my God, oh my God, is this it? Like, is this it?
Right.
And I started to think this is the moment what Elizabeth Lesser calls the knocking at your soul. In the middle of the night when we're staring at the ceiling, what it starts to knock at your soul? What's that whisper that you hear? And for me, it was, if I stay, will I cheat? And I had never
quick,
looked.
like,
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Like, if I stay, will I cheat?
Well, I felt this desire. Elizabeth Lesser talks about wanting to leave her first marriage and Eat, Pray, Love. And one of the most profound lines in that book for me, when I read it, when I was very happily married, but I always remembered that line, which was strange to me because I read constantly and I don't remember everything I read. She just wanted to slip out the back door of her marriage and hear the screen door quietly shut behind her. And I just remember thinking, and I really was so in love with my husband on many levels, but I just had this kind of feeling of, this is it. Is this it? Like, I'll never travel. I'll never kiss another guy again. I'll never have that feeling of that thrill. What's going to happen in my career? How will I accomplish my dreams when I have these 3 little children now that I have to provide for 24/7? I felt lonely. I felt desire in a different way. A lot of women come out of, the men should know this, a lot of women come out of their childbearing years, and for many years we're on the pill, the birth control pill, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves off the birth control pill and we're a completely different hormonal beast. And we have this rise in our sexuality. We have sort of a re-sexual awakening and a rise in testosterone between the ages of 38 and 45. And I could feel that sort of coursing through my veins. And I never wanted, as a therapist, the worst thing you can imagine doing is cheating, because you see couples come in who have experienced it and it's devastating. I say that it's like a car wreck. And I am the girl in the hazmat suit picking up the pieces along the side of the road, sort of laying them out in front of these people's lives. And so if anything will turn you off to having an affair, it's being a therapist who treats couples who have gone through one. But I had this, my imagination started running, kind of wild, late at night. And the thing about that moment for men, and for all of your listeners who are feeling stuck, is that there's different ways you can go about handling it. And many people go about handling it by having an affair of some sort, whether it's an emotional one or a physical one. And affairs actually have a lot to do with death. They come out of a place of feeling like I'm not alive enough. That there's like a death in our youth when actually we finished having our children. And then all of a sudden we see this second half of our lives in front of us and we think, is it going to look just like the beginning? Or just like the first 35 years in some way? And is it going to be filled with monotony and routine and financial pressure and lack of freedom? And I think a lot of people struggle with this very, very privately. And when they do and they don't express it or they don't talk about it, whether it's to their partners or to a therapist or however they're able to process it, they end up again self-medicating with either food or pornography or an affair or alcohol or pills, whatever kind of dark, sort of more self-sabotaging, reckless behavior we can think of. So,
And to your point,
yeah.
those are a lot of the things that we hear, is the men who, I mean, like, you've been told stories that you're just like, wow, I can't believe this person's telling me this, I'm sure, especially
Nothing
maybe,
shocks me anymore.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I invite the story in, actually. I'm the one who's
Right.
like, oh, tell me that story. Yeah. Because it
But
makes me feel not alone. I mean, on the
right.
deepest level, right? It makes me, whether I'm a man or a woman or hearing it from a man or a woman, it makes me feel deeply connected to someone else's human spirit. And I think many of us just don't want to feel alone in this world.
I
Good.
agree.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed about the thing I wanted to say, because it brought up a lot for me when you were talking about those things. It shocks me. So like we have this private Facebook group called, it's closed. You have to get in by request only, which is the Dad Edge private Facebook group. We have almost 4,000 guys in there right now.
So
And
awesome. So awesome.
oh, thanks.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is when what I like to say about that group is we live life together. So many men feel that they're another problem. Going back to what I was saying, another problem that I hear all the time is I'm all alone in
That's
this.
so alone. Yeah.
I feel, and I'm the only one that feels this way. And the first thing I always tell guys is, number one, you're not alone. Number two, everyone feels like you do. I'm not kidding. Like every guy I ever talked to feels like you do to some degree, whether it's more or less or whatever, but that's not for me to say more or less, but you're not alone. But what I've seen is so many men will admit, that they'll find those releases and those outlets in the ways that you talk about, which so many of our guys, will wholeheartedly admit, I drink too much, or I look at way too much online porn, or I do drugs, or I have affairs, or I even have emotional affairs. Doesn't have to be physical; it's emotional affairs. But like, there's some place that these guys will always act out. And what I've noticed is, this has been the most fascinating thing I think about the Dad Edge is that, and I can relate to this because of the man I am as well. So I think people think because I do this podcast, like I have all these really close-knit relationships on a local level. And the truth of the matter is I have two. So I have two guys that I could sit down with and literally say anything to, but it's taken me a long time to get to that level from a physical standpoint, like being in the same room or sitting across the same coffee table as them. And most men don't have anybody in their life, no one that they can go talk to about this stuff. But here's the fascinating thing. So men feel stranded on their own little island. What I've noticed about the Dad Edge Facebook group is there's something weird. And I don't know, maybe weird is the wrong word, but there's something interesting that when you put a keyboard and a screen in front of a man, he suddenly feels brave enough to ask 4,000 other guys, hey guys, I am struggling with pornography. Do any of you guys struggle with this? And if so, what are some ways you guys have been able to overcome it? And like, when I see a post like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, I wouldn't ask my best friend this stuff. But suddenly these guys will talk about alcohol. They'll talk about affairs. They'll talk about all these things that they want to seek strength and guidance and advice on, but they will not go and tell the people that they're best friends with.
Well, and I think that goes back to your original point, was that a lot of people, women actually have much better tribal ties.
They do.
Right? We have a lot, but we work really hard, and interpersonal, those close interpersonal relationships come much more easily for women, are much more socially acceptable, where it's not as acceptable for men. They're not cultivated. And I think it comes down to also, men are expected to perform at such a high rate at their jobs. And then they're expected to perform at home at night in terms of emotionally for their wife or their partner and sexually. And then they're supposed to be a dad. Where is there room in a man's life to actually cultivate deep relationships with other men that feel safe and comfortable and socially appropriate, whatever that means to them, right? So there's this like self-consciousness about everything, and people are inhibited. Men are so inhibited. So you're right. They get into a safe space, and that's what you've created. You've created a really safe space for men to be able to express themselves and not feel alone.
I appreciate that.
And to get advice and to get concrete, like, hey, this is what I tried. Maybe it'll work for you.
Right. I mean, it always fascinates me. Even I love watching body language. Like I love it. It just fascinates me. I've read books on it. You know way more about it than anybody, I'm sure. I always love to watch people's body language, especially like in a social setting, a work function. You can tell when people are out on a date. You can tell when people are into their dates. You can tell people when they're into their relationships. So one thing I've always found with men is that we, in a social setting, we won't stand face to face. We'll stand shoulder to shoulder with our drink like this.
Yeah.
It's like we're guarding. It's like we're shielding
for people
everything.
for people who can't see him, he's basically doing the power pose from that TED Talk, like that, like strong power pose with the drink right in the middle of your chest.
Yeah, right here.
Right, right. Yeah.
Like I'll talk to you about sports, and I'll talk to you about the weather, and
I'm going to cover my heart. I'm going to cover my heart with my drink.
And I'll answer every question you give me with the words "good" or "fine." Yeah. How's work? Good, fine. How are the kids? Oh, they're good. True. They're fine.
It's so true. Yeah.
That's how we don't let anybody in. So, but deep down, I can tell you this: we want to, we really do. We don't want to be that guy. You know what I mean?
So I have to say, on a personal level, I love working with women. I love women. I've always had really close female relationships. My two best friends that I have in the world I've known them since I was 2 years old, basically. And since I was a kid, I have a bunch of girlfriends that I've known forever. But the gift in my private practice has been watching men open up to me, because it's like it's as if a dam breaks, because it's incredible. It's this real moment of intimacy to watch a man open up about his feelings and show how vulnerable he is, and perhaps frightened or confused or in love. Because you know that it's not something you get to see every day. It's sort of like a rainbow revealing itself.
Right.
And I think men get a really bad rap. I mean, I think today, especially, we're doing this podcast, we're recording it just a couple days before the inauguration. I'm actually heading down to the Women's March down in Washington for work, and to cover parts of the inauguration for what I do, the journalism that I do. And I think that men have gotten a really bad rap. And the men that I've both encountered professionally and personally over the last few years have been incredible. And in part thanks to forums like yours, where we're getting men to connect to their own souls and to what's really going on. Because you know what? Men don't want to be douchebags, right? They don't want to be douchey dads. They don't want to fail. Oh my God. They are like deathly afraid of failure.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like they're these like just beautiful species who are just saying, like, if you give me the information, you tell me what to do, I'll do it, and I promise I'll do it to the best of my ability. They can pivot. Men know how to pivot, but sometimes they get stuck because they don't see a way. They don't have enough information to be able to pivot. I
agree. And I think one thing that's cool about if you get men to that place of safety. And yes. I'll even say this, because I've learned a lot about branding and what men gravitate to and what they don't. And if you're going to create a safe place, you can't call it a safe place. Right. You can't even call it what it is. You have to call it a cool place. Yes, we've talked about this. Yeah, it's fascinating too. Like what I've noticed is that's why it's the dad's edge, and like, because we'll talk about anything. It doesn't have to be PC. It doesn't have to be, you can be very direct if you want, right? Yeah. And one of the cool things about who likes that, go ahead. Keep going. But one of the cool things about that atmosphere is what do men have the hardest time with, and what do men love doing the most? Men have the hardest time asking for help, and men love to give advice and to give guidance. So when you create a platform like that, like for instance, like the Dad Edge group, I love it because it gives that man the cool factor that he needs to feel okay with asking for help. Right. And it gives 4,000 other guys, it makes them feel pretty cool because they're like, oh, there's a guy who's asking for advice on how to, overcome financial burdens and trying to get more financially free. I've done a good job at that. I can tell him what to do, and they feel significant, right? I'm helping someone, right. I'm giving somebody else the keys. And then, so you're really helping both, because guys love to, if you look at when a guy comments or posts something, about something's going on in his life, I'll look at the posts, and I can't keep up with the posts, but there are usually over 100 guys that will post on that guy's question. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, So you can, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic.
Well, that's the thing, right, too. It's like they're such complicated species. They're so uncomplicated on some level. The complicated part, though, is that how do you work with their egos to be able to lure them in, like let them hold on to enough of their egos to lure them into a place where then you can say, hey, you can let your ego go in here.
Yeah.
Like, let's just reach a place of higher power and deep meaning and like get down to business. And it's going to be messy. It's going to be uncomfortable. We're going to talk about things, but you're going to feel super connected and you're going to learn a shit ton, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to go back and sort of circle back around, and this will bring us back to the beginning and where we started this interview today, which is to safety, is to men feeling safe, to human beings feeling safe. And I was telling you before we actually started to press record that I woke up this morning, and so I'm a woman who didn't get any alimony. I actually paid alimony for a year. I didn't get any child support. I have 3 kids. I've always had a successful private practice on Fifth Avenue, New York City. I also have an office now in Westport, Connecticut. I'm very grateful for my journey because as much as it's been difficult, it's pushed me to do things that I never necessarily would have been pushed to do. And it's also made me relate to men in a completely different way than many of my girlfriends relate to men, because I understand the financial pressures that they're under to be one of the major primary breadwinners in a relationship. And I think more and more women are going to be facing this as we end up divorced and everybody has to have a 2-family income. But for now, it really helps me understand the psychology of men and sort of what they face at the end of the day. And this idea when we hit like that 35, 36, 37 sort of midlife crisis, how tethered we feel to our lives, that we've all of a sudden constructed this life and now we think, oh my God, how am I supposed to fund it? And I've got all these mouths to feed, and that can really feel crushing. So we talked about you not feeling safe as a kid, and that was an element of your childhood. Can you just say to your audience members, what has helped you to feel safer in this world as you've learned on your journey growing up? I mean, we talked about, like, I woke up this morning thinking, am I ever going to feel safe? Like, there's still an element in me as I got up to meditate at 5:45 this morning, as self-aware as I am, no matter how much money I ever make, will I ever feel safe? And safety is kind of an illusion, right? Because we don't really know what's going to happen every day. All we can count on is today. Right? Human beings love to feel like we're going to know something and that everything's concrete. Where really, studies tell us that if we actually knew what was going to happen, we'd be super bored, and we don't really want to know. We want there to be somewhat of a journey. So, but with that said, you need some element of safety to not crumble under stress.
That is such a good question, and it's so important. So what I think about that is, because if you look at the 6 basic human needs, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which is, one is certainty, one is uncertainty. We have a need for uncertainty, so we like variety. We don't want to be bored. We want to know that we don't know what today holds. But what I will tell you is, I don't know if there will ever be enough money in the bank that I would ever feel like 100% certain. I would like to say that my marriage is going to last forever, but no one knows that for certain. The one thing that gives me safety is community, and being a part of a tribe, being a part of a thriving community where we can have real conversations about life and not the surface stuff. Because to be honest with you, at this point, I think the surface stuff is a waste of time.
Waste of time. Yeah.
It is. It's just, I'm bored with it, to be honest with you.
I'm not very good at it. I actually am not very good at it. As you know, I dive right in. This interview is a great example of it. Like, I just can't go light. I like to go high-low. Like, there has to be some humor to it, but I like to go deep. And I know that's going to drive a lot of men crazy hearing me say that I like to go deep, but it's true.
I don't remember what I was saying now.
I know.
It's gone.
Oh, I screwed that up.
No, but I think honestly, like, just having a tribe and having community, because and going back to that statement, like, let's live life together and not on our own. I mean, we're social beings, but so many men, the older we get, the less social we get. and we feel that we have to take on all this stuff by ourselves. And even me, I mean, I'm 41, and I feel that at times I have to go at this alone. And sometimes when my stress level reaches a max point, I reach out to like one of my guys that I'm good friends with that I can say anything to. The first thing is like, dude, why are you taking all this on by yourself? Like, don't you know all you have to do is reach out to me? Like, I'll take care of this for you. I'll do that for you. I'll do that. You like share the weight.
Ask for
You
some
don't
help.
ask for help.
Yeah, we're
I mean,
shitty at asking for help, most of us.
we are. And here's the other thing too. One more thing about community. I've always been fascinated with the Navy SEALs. And I think it's because I'm so fascinated by them because they seem to have like this X factor in their training that they can get through anything. They can get through anything. And
my mind just went to such a horny place when you started talking about the Navy SEAls.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to focus, but I'm like, yeah, me too. I've always had a thing for Navy SEAls. But again, to be honest with you, it stems back to power and a sense of safety around them and a sense that they would take care of everything. And if my children, just biologically, if my children were in danger, that they would save the world. They would save us. They would save the planet. Yeah. They're superheroes. They're like our modern day superheroes.
They are. Do you know where their power comes from? Their power comes from teams. That's what they say.
I wasn't going to say that, actually.
Yeah. The power.
I was going to say the power comes from that they've been so well trained that they have these incredible minds.
Yeah.
That but you're right. It's from the team.
Well, they even have an acronym for team. And the A stands for ask for help. That's what they'll do. That's part of their
training.
That's part of training and who they are is like, do not try to do this by yourself. Ask for help from your team. Your team always has your 6. You've got your 12. You have 2 guys that have your 3 and your 9. One guy's got your 6. If you don't feel you can do something by yourself, you have your team. You have to ask for help. So these guys are trained to ask for help. I mean, it goes back to what they say all the time too. 2 is 1, 1 is none. I mean, that's what they say about their gear. If they have 2 pairs of boots, that's 1 pair of boots. It's all about their team and asking for help. And so, yeah, I mean, I think safety comes from asking for help and knowing you're a part of a community, a team, a tribe, and you don't have to live life alone.
Well, it's interesting. Two points about that is that there's this ethos in American society, especially in Western society, much more so than I think in Eastern cultures, where it's all being an American is all about sort of being independent and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps and getting it done and rising up every morning and feeling like you have to do it alone. People take pride in that almost, where I think that's shifting. I'm hoping that's shifting because it obviously doesn't work, right? We need we function and we thrive in community settings.
I agree.
The second thing, just to bring it down to a practical level, because I'd love to do that and talk about how we can take tribe and take your theories about safety and tribe and bring them back into our marriages or our relationships, is that I always tell, and this sounds cliche, but many people can't do it. We talked about it before we press record as well, that in marriages, you have to look at your partner as part of your tribe, part of your team.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Not as a caricature of someone that you think that they are, not as like necessarily the wife. You have to coach each other as if you're on the same team. And a lot of marriages begin to fall apart because you start to feel like you're not on the same team.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much today for being on the show. There's one question that you ask every one of your guests at the end of the show. Can you share that before we end today?
Yeah, I ask every single guest, what is one parting piece of wisdom that you can share on how to be a good dad?
So I'm going to ask you, Larry, what is one piece of parting wisdom you can share with everyone out there on how to be a good dad?
I used to say quality over quantity. It doesn't matter how much time you spend with your kids. It matters how you spend that time. Like, for instance, if you are with your kid for 60 minutes and you spend 40 minutes of that, not interacting, you're on your phone, you're standing next to each other, how impactful is that? Now, if you go and leave the phone, in the house and you go outside and you play catch, you wrestle around, you go on a hike, you go rock climbing, you do something that's more of an experience. What is that kid going to remember? You know, the kid's going to remember, you know, the dad looking down at his phone and not being there. But you know, my answer to this question has changed here recently. So that we just launched your show on mine. But
Today?
yeah, today. So we launched your show today, which is funny, which is January 16th. But the week before yours, I had on two Navy SEALs, Eric Davis and Larry Yacht. Eric Davis wrote the best-selling book called Raising Men. Eric Davis also trained Chris Kyle and Marcus Luttrell. I don't know if you know who that is, American Sniper, Chris Kyle. And then, so anyway, I asked those guys what their parting piece of wisdom was. And now this one's my favorite, which is learn to teach. And I was like, that blew me away. It's so simple, but yet learn to teach. So I think a lot of what we do as fathers is we do a lot of telling, and we don't necessarily do a lot of showing. And sometimes I think when you have to teach, it takes more time. So when you're telling, you're not necessarily teaching, you're telling. But when you teach, you're actually taking the time to show that child, show why, and then show the results. You know, so learn to teach. I think I am now the biggest fan of that piece of advice is learn to teach.
So as a woman, I'm going to add a little bit to that, not necessarily as a woman, but as a woman and as a clinician, as someone, just to add that I think it's learn to teach. The way I immediately interpreted that in my own head was that men do a lot of speaking and we don't actually do a lot of listening.
Oh my gosh. I totally agree with that.
I think people do in general. I think it's a hard thing for men to do because the minute a woman starts speaking or a child starts speaking, they want to fix the problem.
I agree.
And I think that we have really, and this goes back to what we were saying throughout the entire show and what your show has done. People actually listen to your show. They can't talk back to it.
Right.
And they also go into these groups that you've created and they listen to each other in a safe space. They don't, and then they get to speak as well. But there's a lot of listening that goes on. And we all have, one of our deepest human needs is to be heard and to be listened to and to be seen and then still loved. So that's the point of pain when anyone rejects us, whether it's a parent or a lover or a child. When a child rejects a parent or a parent rejects a child, it comes down to, I showed you who I was and it wasn't good enough. And so that's where I think that we have to listen to each other even more and speak less. So,
can I give one more too? Just
please. Oh my God, you're such a good dad expert. Are you kidding? I want to hear everything you have to say.
I'll bring my kids up here right now. I'd be like, hey, tell them how much I was in a bad mood yesterday. Or, because you go through those times where you're just like yesterday, I felt like I sucked as a father. Like I had all three kids all three, I have four, but I had three of them with me yesterday. I took them to a St. Louis motorcycle show.
Alone or with your wife?
No, just the four boys. We call it guys time.
Yeah.
And so I made, we had a really good, but my kids we've had bad weather here for the past few days. So my kids have had cabin fever for the past 3 days.
And they're boys. They're crazy.
Boys. So I took them to this show and then we were there. I mean, we had a great time. And I was in a good mood for most of the time. And then we sat down and I made the mistake of giving them caffeinated soda, which they don't drink caffeinated soda.
That's brilliant.
They went
crazy
nuts.
Yeah.
And they were climbing all over these bikes that were like $30,000 going crazy. And I'm like, holy shit. I was like, get off. I'm like flipping out at this point. Like I didn't make a scene, but inside I was like boiling, right?
Yeah.
And by the time we got out to the car, the kids were like, Dad, like, why are you so mad? I was like, dude,
you were
guys
awful.
Are climbing. Yeah, I was like, you guys are off the wall in there. I kept telling you guys to stop. Like, you can't do that. And they're like, why are you so angry? I was like, do you have any, those bikes were like $50,000, dude. Like the owner's right there. You're trying to climb on his bike, dude. Like they were just, and the 3-year-old, I mean, the two older ones were okay, but the 3-year-old was insane. I mean, like it was crazy. So yeah, but
and he drank the soda too.
Yeah, he drank some of my, I had some Diet Pepsi and he drank some of it. And it wasn't until after he got done with it.
So funny. That's such a rookie mistake.
Oh, I know.
You should know better.
Shit. Yeah.
Oh, my kids grab for Coke. I'm like, you can go basically F yourself. You're not drinking that.
Yeah, it's bad. But no, I'd say the final thing is your kids will learn how to treat a woman and love their woman by how you treat their mom. And I'm big on that. So like, I know this sounds kind of odd, but if I always think of these little eyes that are around my wife and I as like movie cameras. And I always think about like, if I was going to be a star in their movie, you know, like that they're watching, how do I need to treat their mom? So like, for
Yes, when
instance,
kids come in, what young adults come in, that's exactly what they say the experience is like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it really?
Well, especially only children will come in and they'll say, I had to grow up in a movie where there were 4 movie cameras on me, each eye. So I had 2 sets of parents' eyes on me at all times. So
Yeah.
this intense stare was on me all the time as an only child. And then the reverse is actually true, that you have all these little cameras watching you constantly, recording every one of your moves. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a very
But
apt metaphor.
yeah, just,
Yeah.
and that's the way I think of it is if I'm going to show these kids how to love a woman, you know, here's how I'll do it. Like I think back, I didn't have the best mom or father figures growing up, but I did have an amazing grandfather. And I learned how to love a woman by the way he treated my grandma. He was unbelievably affectionate. He was so complimentary. Always told my grandma how beautiful she was. He hugged her. He kissed her. He would slap her on the ass as she would walk by.
He was
I mean,
hot
stuff
for
like,
her. Yeah, he
I
wanted
mean,
her.
he would like 68 years old. He would pull her pull her down on his lap and kiss her on the cheek and be like, I love you so much. And I remember like, even now, like talking about it kind of gives me the chills because I remember being that kid and I remember like having that feeling of like, oh man, this just feels safe to be here. You know, there's no yelling, there's no craziness, there's no drinking, there's no beatings. Like this feels good. And my wife always said, like, she's like, you're the most complimentary man like I've ever been with. Like you're always complimenting me. Like, why is that? Well, number one, it's part of my love language. So I love to be complimented. So I always, you know, you
Good
always
to
show
hear.
love in your own. But I was like, she's like, I think you got that from your grandpa because that's the way he always was. And he was real affectionate. I'm real affectionate. So my kids get to see that. And what I'm seeing now is like, you know, my oldest are 10 and 9. What I see now is the fruits of that. So like the 2 older ones in particular, they don't hesitate to tell another kid when they're doing a good job. They don't hesitate to tell their mother how beautiful that she looks that day. And my wife, I don't really think much of it, but then my wife will be like, they're getting that from you. You know, they hear that and now they're hearing that. And so now they're doing it. And so I never thought of it that way, but you know, loving your wife.
I wish so. I wish we could put that into like that, like a simple little phrase. What would that be? Just that
I think kids will learn I think kids will learn
through that example,
through the example.
through the
They'll learn
behavior.
a healthy relationship through the relationship that they see with you and whether it be whatever that person is, married or stepfather,
And I mean,
whatever.
and it's okay to end on a complicated note because life is complicated. So in my life, I don't have anyone showing my kids that per se right now. So that ends up being a different challenge as to how do all of these single moms teach their boys how to treat women and without there being a male figure to internalize around 24/7.
Right.
And that's the topic of another show where we'll have to talk about how women actually have to do that in this new age where many of us are raising little boys to become great men. And we have to do it in a way that makes sense to those little boys and they can internalize something bigger that isn't necessarily happening in their home lives, which is the witnessing of a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
I'm lucky in my own life, I have a little girl as well. I would have killed myself if I had had 3 boys. I love my boys, but my hat goes off to you. 4 boys, that would have sunk my ship big time. They are so active, and I'm lucky that I do have this little girl who I can work with them to show the boys how to respect their sister. And hopefully that will carry over as they become teenagers and young men. So,
Yeah.
Larry, you're the best. You're the best. Is there anything left that you want to say? Is there any shout out you want to give? Obviously, everyone who's listening. I keep thinking as we're talking, I'm like, well, do you miss women in this whole world of podcasts? I was the first woman in 200 shows ever to be on your show, which is a huge honor. Do the guys ever want, the women around? Are you starting to feel after 2 years like you could use a little bit of the other side?
The downloads and the comments will say it all. And right now, the downloads of your show, they are the fastest I've ever seen on any show. And we've had some crazy guests, like pro athletes, UFC fighters, and New York Times bestsellers, Navy SEALs. But right now, your show is downloading the fastest. So I'll let you know. That's a good sign that we need more women. So up until now, I've shared. I had a co-host with the podcast, and we always, he liked to incorporate some of these rules.
Now, is he still with you? He's not.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
We have parted ways on a good note, by the way, just on a really good note.
Yeah.
Just his brand and my brand is just getting too big for us to try to do this together.
Yeah.
But he always had these stipulations. Okay, it has to be a guy. It has to be a dad. It has to be this. And I was always the one being like, well, hey, I want to have women. I want to have guys who aren't fathers. I want to have this. And no, can't do that. So now I'm just like, well, we're not doing the show together anymore. So now I'm like, I want the content, not necessarily the, and the person, but I think that this is going to be good.
Awesome. Yeah. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I can't wait to keep having more conversations with you. And again, please, everyone, look out for the Good Dad Project. It's amazing. I even as a woman, I want to say this, as a woman yesterday, I told Larry before we started the show, I sat in the bathtub last night and I downloaded podcast after podcast. And even though it's a show focused on men, if you want to learn about men and what's going on in their minds, it's an incredible resource to figure out what's going on there. So I'm really appreciative of the work that you do. Thank you. Thank you.
Same here.
All right.
I'm no good at goodbye. Down on my knees, tears in my eyes. I'm no good at goodbye.
What an amazing episode. God, I am so grateful Larry opened up to me. I had no idea he had been through so much. What a huge inspiration he is to create something so beautiful like the Good Dad Project from that type of place of pain. To further the conversation, please join us in our private Facebook group called Daily Unscripted. That's DALY Unscripted. And please check us out. Check all of our episodes out at thedaily.com. That's DALY.com. Or you can contact me directly at nell@thedaily.com. I am still checking my personal emails at this point, so if you have any guest ideas or questions, or even if you think you may want to be on our show or know someone who could benefit from being on the show, let me know, let us know over here at Point Zero Productions. And as always, guys, you can follow my comings and goings at Nell Daily on Instagram. What a pleasure it's been today. Until next time, guys, peace out.
No good at goodbye. Down on my knees, tears in my eyes. I'm no good at goodbye.